Hello and good afternoon, and welcome to our next pillar at InvestNorth, which is funding and investment. The North has been an increasingly successful breeding ground for unicorns. The successes of AO.com Trader, Boohoo, the Hook Group, and Matillion show that huge businesses can be built in the northern region. Sitting alongside the businesses, we also have a range of startups to scale up from across a range of sectors. Firms such as Peak AI and icelolly.com that have attracted early stage funding to private equity rounds are growing, creating jobs and putting the north on the map. But to do that, it requires a levelling up of business funding, which remains disproportionately weighted to London and the South East. In this session, you'll hear from businesses that have attracted funding, including Manchester's very latest unicorn Matillion, as well as from funders about what it is that makes the North a great region for innovation, attracting funding and growing those early scale-up businesses. First up, we have renowned venture capitalist John Moulton in conversation with Chris Hume, director at Influential. John trained as an accountant in Liverpool before building a career that's led to him being one of the leading venture capitalists of his generation. He brings international expertise and a unique perspective to the business investment debate. And we're going to hear from him in just a couple of minutes before the next session starts. Thank you.
Hello, as part of the funding and investment stream at InvestNorth, I'm now going to speak to John Moulton, one of Britain's best-known venture capitalists. My name is Chris Hume, I'm a director at Influential, and I've encountered John over the years as he's invested in various R&D businesses. These include the drug discovery company Redex Pharma, which he backed when it was a startup in an incubator unit in Liverpool, through to listing on AIM and for some time afterwards. Today, John is a non-executive chairman of Infex Therapeutics, which is based at Alderley Park in Cheshire. Infex scientists are working on various infectious disease therapies, including preparing for new variants of COVID. It's also looking at what we do about our dwindling supply of antibiotics. Antimicrobial resistance, AMR, is a huge threat to public health here, there, and everywhere else. John, thanks for taking part in InvestNorth. When we see you on Sky News or the BBC, you're often introduced as the founder and chairman of the private equity firm Better Capital, but that's just a small part of what you do, isn't it?
It's literally the tail end of the business, that is. Most of what I do is looking after the 80-odd venture capital investments we have in the family office.
I know you through life science investing, but appreciate you're active in lots of other sectors. Drug discovery is not for the faint-hearted, is it? With the average cost of a drug, taking a new drug to market at around $1.3 billion. How do you rationalize the risk?
Yes, it is risky, but actually over the years, the amount of money I've lost in most other sectors is a great deal more than I've lost in life sciences. The problem is that life science deals are rarely nice and linear. You know, they discover something, their value goes through the roof. They have a failed trial, their value goes through the floor. And sometimes it's about surviving till you hit a success. And you know, nobody can get this game 100% perfect. Most of it is in something like drug discovery or highly technical development. And there's obviously technical, competitor risk, execution risk. It's risky. So you try and find a good management team. You try and set a sensible objective. I mean, doing a startup that's going to launch small molecule chemical cures for cancer, that's where your 1.3 billion starts to come in.
What do you look for in management teams?
Right, it's not an easy question to answer because teams work in different ways. Some work well with a dictatorial type fellow at the top. Others work well with very diverse group of people working on pretty well an equal basis. Both models work, but they don't all work all the time. So you have to work out for yourself whether you think the management's up to the job, whatever its form is. But it's quite difficult to come up with the magic formula. Over years, the only thing that's worked for me is an exclusion criteria, which is I never back anybody who's had more than 2 divorces, because that genuinely is a really serious predictor of failure.
Has the pandemic improved the investability of biotechs and diagnostics and life science in general?
Even the regulators, God bless them, have actually woken up to it. We've got some changes coming to clinical trials rules, for example. But the main thing has just been a pace increase. People realize that you can do things very quickly. You don't have to mess about with months of waiting for committee meetings. You can set one up for tomorrow afternoon on Zoom and get on with it. So the pace has definitely gone up a long way, particularly in anything vaguely related to COVID.
You're a rare individual investing in the development of new antibiotics. Big Pharma's been in a race, hasn't it, to get out of that market for 10 years and more. The business case for investing in a drug you want people to take as a last resort is not as strong as some other business cases. What progress are we making fixing the market and ensuring that research is incentivized, the sort of work that Infex does?
I think we've learned that crap happens. I mean, at the moment, 90-odd% of gonorrhea cases in the UK respond to a cheap old-fashioned antibiotic. There isn't much of a market in the 2 or 3% that's really quite drug resistant. So yes, you're right, the economics are difficult. But then one day we might wake up and discover that the gonorrhea has actually mutated, become more infectious, more pathogenic, and more drug resistant. And that can happen. We've seen what happens with different strains of COVID. And that's happening with bacteria all day, every day. So you need to be prepared. We actually need, as a society, to have some weapons in the locker, let out when they're needed. As it is, we've recently had papers published in the Lancet, which show that actually the totality of people dying from HIV and TB is already less than the number of people dying from antimicrobial problems, where we've got drug-resistant bacteria killing people in volume, particularly in low-resource areas, where the alternatives don't get deployed. So the move towards the finding some more antibiotics, and we're not just antibiotics, there are other things. One thing that's surfaced over the last couple of years is that we can actually manufacture cells to order to actually tackle infections. This was something that was pretty well on the dream list 3 years ago, but now it's an actual possibility happening quickly. The ability to manipulate cells, whether they be stem cells or cells that produce monoclonal antibodies, the mRNA type things, there's tons happening at pace, which can open new therapeutic routes. But you should worry. There's no reason for it just to be viruses that give us a pandemic. We've had a thing called the Black Death, which was microbial. We could have a fungal one, which is actually probably even more frightening. There are very few antifungal drugs. And if some nasty beast turns up that's there in volume, then that could kill a lot of people. There's already one pretty unpleasant fungus out there that's fairly well able to knock off most of the current treatments. There will be others. So yeah, there's something to worry about. But we do have to keep reminding people it needs worrying about, and part of that does lie with government, because it's very hard to imagine why a commercial operation would sit on something which might be needed in 6 months or 6 years, but we don't know which.
Are we bridging the north-south gap in terms of science infrastructure?
There's a bit moving in that direction. And there's actually quite good resources. There's no sort of magic piece of kit that's missing from north of Birmingham that's only available in London anymore. There is clearly still a massive concentration of intellectual excellence in Oxford, Cambridge, and London, which takes a knocking off its perch. So getting people here, we need to make it attractive for people to live here. We need to make sure there's ready and adequate access to funding. We just need to make it as easy as we can. We probably need to make sure there's plenty of housing available, things like that. And what we shouldn't do, and what we've historically done, and we're in danger of doing it again, is set up innumerable life science hubs. We need a few large hubs, not many small ones. Small ones are not very efficient. You don't get any of the benefits of concentration, which is really what drives London, the benefits of concentration. So we need fewer large hubs.
What about the success of spin-outs from universities? Is that an important metric for the North?
University spin-outs are actually really quite difficult to measure. There are a few that have been very successful and more recurring, but there are also an enormous number of ones that fail quietly and nobody knows about. Again, it's to a large extent, not always. You can imagine spin-outs that require very small amounts of capital, but mostly successful spin-outs eat a lot of cash. And the UK has a nasty habit of having a high approval rate for deals coming out of universities and giving them £250,000, £500,000 or £1 million. A management team which is barely competent commercial activities because they haven't done it before. And guess what? They fail in bucketfuls. If you've got £10 million, you can probably attract a better management team, do the job a lot better, and on average, fewer larger spin-outs is a good idea. But there's a whole industry that thinks it's a good idea to get everything chucked out. The reality is that money put into failing projects diminishes the economy and doesn't improve it, and actually that could damage the North. And there is a tendency. It's not just the North. Wales and Scotland have suffered a lot from backing far too high a percentage of the projects coming out of universities.
During the coalition government, you were on the board of the Regional Growth Fund, which I believe had about £4 billion to invest. What can you tell us about the experience of public sector funding the private sector investment?
I'd love to be able to tell you properly. First of all, I don't even know how much money it was eventually disbursed on. Started off at 2 point something, went to 3.2, 3.6, 4.2, 4.5, and then it closed. How much was ever spent, I don't know. The government set it up with a view to having an annual report on how successful the money had gone out. Well, actually, they only produced one, and that was when they put out about a quarter of the money in the first year and never did it again. So we don't have any means of knowing how good it was. What I can tell you is that politicians overrule the advisory board, which looked at potential situations quite carefully in about 40% of cases. And it was never to take anything on, it was to put stuff on the table where we thought they didn't deserve to be taken forward. And there was, I'm afraid, quite a lot of unmitigated rubbish done. So I guess, because I can only guess, because nobody's done the bloody numbers, nobody knows what actually came out, but it was an abortion. And it's very easy to do. Chucking money at problems is always attractive, it's quick, but it needs to be done well.
What do you make of levelling up?
It was a brilliant PR line for a start. I mean, levelling up implies something which means that there's enough growth in the economy for everybody to be happy in the south and the north at once. But today, post-Ukraine and all the inflation stuff coming in, looks pretty unlikely. So yeah, can we improve the north? Yes. Will we level it? I think it'll be a long way forward.
Yeah. You've worked through some big recessions, a global banking crisis, the pandemic, Brexit. We now have Russia as a pariah state invading its neighbour. Can we work through these issues? How are we going to ride out all the disruption around inflation, skill shortages, and all the rest of it?
Well, I'm old, and I may just about have enough longevity left to be able to see the end of this current problem, but it's going to be a very bad time. It's really going to be a bad time. There's going to be, things have changed in the last 48 hours. and just think about the net zero type agenda. Well, if we haven't got enough gas to actually keep the blasted place warm, I don't think the politics will be all that unfavourable about lighting up coal-fired again, or more nuclear, which, you know, there's plenty of opposition to that. We're going to see quite drastic changes driven by the reality that we've got existential threats that involve apparently lunatics on a couple of thousand miles away in Europe.
You were born in Stoke, which almost qualifies you as a northerner. How do you think that coming from the potteries has affected the path you've taken in life?
It's had its fair share of people who've done well. And actually, certainly when I was a lad, it had an excellent education system, which was really gave lots of opportunity. I didn't come from a rich background.
Yeah.
Though I was relatively rich. I mean, it's hard to think back. But when I was I was about 10, my father owned a 15-year-old car. I was the only father in the class whose dad owned a car. It was poor, but it was cleaning itself up from the potteries and the steel industries. Became much more habitable, much less TB, which I also had as a child there. And it improved greatly. Look, apartheid I remember really fondly. There were some very useful influences there. And it certainly taught me self-reliance because you needed to.
John, thank you for your time today. We appreciate you taking part in Invest North, and we wish you every success for the rest of 2022.
Thank you.
Welcome back. Thank you, John, and thank you, Chris. I'm sure I found that really interesting. It's nice to hear what John had to say about development and successes in the life sciences sector, big pharma, drugs discovery, and you know what, it's still quite an interesting sector to be looking at when it comes to funding and investment. And we'll actually hear more from the life sciences sector later on this afternoon. In a couple of minutes, we have our next session, which is looking at investing in northern companies. We're talking to two funders. That will start at 12:25. So do please stay on, and I'll catch you all in a bit. Hi, and welcome back to our next session. We previously heard from John Moulton, and we're about to hear from two funders regarding investment opportunities in the region and what make funders tick. I'm joined by Louise Chapman, Investment Director at Protura Ventures, and Greg Holmes, Impact Fund Investment Manager at Palatine Private Equity. Welcome.
Hi.
Hi. So you guys have, backed some really interesting businesses across the north. I mean, Protura Ventures, you've backed companies like Peak AI and Fertility Doctor and Culture Shift recently, and Greg, you've had Transcript, which isn't in our region, but it's still an interesting company. But one that is in the region is Anthesis. That was pretty recent. So a question to you both: what is it about companies that makes you think they're a good investment? What attracts you to those kind of businesses? And Louise, do you want to kick off?
Yeah, sure. So we're an early stage investor, so we're a venture capitalist. The key things that we're absolutely looking for are the management. So is this team someone who we can back? What have they done so far with the business? Where have they got to, and what's their vision for the future? And are these people that we can actually work with, in the short to medium term whilst they achieve their strategy? And also, like I just said before, the momentum of the business. So we're not a startup funder, so we're looking for a bit of momentum, a bit of traction, whether that's kind of contracts with customers that are generating revenue, or they develop their product, so it's pretty well developed, so we can see a real path to to earning those revenues and starting that growth.
Right. Thanks, Louise and Greg.
Yeah, I think the first thing would be to echo what Louisa said there about the people. Management teams are key to the business and key to the investment opportunity. And that's one of the first things we look at when we're assessing businesses. I think from some additional bits from Palatine, sustainability, the key theme for us. It's a key part of our investment criteria. We've been focusing on that for the best part of the last 10 years or so, and the fund which I sit in, which is the Impact Fund. At Palatine, we raised that in 2017, so that it focuses and invests in companies that deliver environmental and societal change as well. So, slightly different to the mainstream PE. But I guess it's a big growing area at the moment.
And there's loads of funders across the north. You're two of some really great companies that we have here. What's the sort of competitiveness like across the north, and also is it easy for companies to access funding? Is it a route that they find, especially in the last year, it's been easy to get to, or is that still a bit of a challenge?
Well, Bajura Ventures was set up because we identified this funding gap in the north. So we think that the north has this great angel network, and getting that very early stage funding it's not easy, but there's quite a lot of funding options there. We've then got an amazing kind of PE community, and corporate finance advisors for kind of IPO, that later stage, but actually that middle section of getting from seed to a bit more of a developed company. We thought there was a real equity gap, and it's one of the reasons why we set up. So we think the community is improving. The funding options are improving, especially with the state-backed funding that's coming into the region and has come into the region. But it's really unfortunate that still we're seeing companies feeling like they're having to go to London to get funding when we've got good regional funding options here. But clearly they've got to be improved, and that's why what we're set out to do as a northern-based funder with a bias towards funding in the north.
Yeah. Why do you think that is, Louise? Why do you think they are still going to London when got guys like you guys we've got offices in the city centre?
Yeah, I think, we're an early stage investor. Our check size is kind of 1 to 3 million. If you're still in the venture space and you need funding of say 10 million, there isn't really anyone who can help you at the moment there, unless you're suitable for more PE funding. But I think as well, we all need to kind of promote the north and the funding options in the north to know that the businesses in our communities can come to us, and it's not just the traditional you must go to London to get funding, and that's what we're really trying to change the message.
Yeah, and Greg, you're on a different sort of scale. Like you're not a startup or scale up. You're sort of like a bit further down, aren't you?
Yeah, so we're lower mid-market private equity. So what does that mean? So we invest between 5 and 30 million pounds into profitable companies, typically making above £1 million EBITDA, and we're constantly assessing the competitive landscape from where we sit in. It's we think it's very competitive at the moment. Last time we counted, there's more than 20 PE houses in Manchester, and a similar large number of funders and well-regarded corporate finance firms across Yorkshire and the North East as well. And we're seeing that play out in the transaction processes that we're playing in. So when companies are seeking external funding and going through that process, we're having to work extremely hard to differentiate ourselves, whether that be through our sector knowledge, our sustainability credentials, or how we work with the management teams to help them accelerate their growth plan. But I guess I personally see it as a positive. There's a wide range of funding options out there. So regardless of whether your funding requirement is tens of thousands of pounds all the way up to hundreds of millions of pounds, there are funders with boots on the ground in the north that can help you.
Yeah, and it's not unusual, is it, for like a funder to go to Prochora, get some VC funding, and further down the line, they're going for PE funding.
Yeah, absolutely. Or the later stage kind of VC. You mentioned PKI earlier, so we were the first institutional investor into Peak. They've since done a number of further rounds and just completed a really sizable round with SoftBank. So we've gone international there. So we definitely see it as kind of, we're usually the first or one of the first institutional investors into a company. And then kind of once they've got that capital to propel that growth and to really work out the strategy and the founder's vision, then who knows where they could get to, in terms of more national or international funders.
Yeah, absolutely. And Louise and Greg, how many applications do you get, or how many businesses do you actually get per month or per year looking for investment, and how many do you accept, or how many do you have to say, try again in a couple of months' time?
Yeah, so we get between 150 and 200 a month coming to us through a variety of different ways. You can direct through our website to send through your pitch deck to us, or we have really close links with some of the accelerator programs and programs there, and also just advisors that we work really closely with. Obviously, we can't fund 150 companies a month, unfortunately, but some of them just, they're really great businesses, they just don't fit our investment criteria, or they're not quite ready for our level of funding yet. So maybe a bit too small. So we try and redirect them to, say, some angel funders or other smaller base funders. And then so we are a UK-based funder at the moment. So any international opportunities at the moment, we can't take forward.
What yourself, Greg? I know it's again on a different scale to you guys.
Yeah, it's interesting to hear those numbers, because we see across the north we're probably meeting sort of 250 companies a year. So transpose that to the monthly numbers. I guess it's just the types of businesses and a slightly different scale. And in terms of how we'll ultimately take forward and transact, we aim to do across the north sort of 3 to 5 transactions a year, always aiming for the bigger number, obviously, but it depends on the competitive landscape and the types of companies that are coming to market, really.
Yeah. That's, what do you think is sort of the culture around funding? Because if you compare the UK, not just Manchester, compared to Silicon Valley, where there's lots of entrepreneurs and they're not scared to go for funding. It's almost sort of an education thing around funding in America compared to the UK. I feel like sometimes entrepreneurs aren't thinking the same way as entrepreneurs maybe in the US when it comes to funding, that is. Do you see a difference? And do you think we can learn a lot from our international sort of partners or international funders?
I think certainly compared to the UK, the US has slightly more advanced venture market than we have here. But I think what's really important and what companies can kind of take from those successes internationally is that fundraising can seem a bit of a distraction from your day-to-day job, and it's quite tempting just to get it done quickly, to get some cash, just to get some cash in the bank and just to move forward with the operational strategy. But we're finding it's so important to make sure that you choose the right investor for you. And actually it's a two-way process. So we're screening companies to check they're right for us in terms of our investment criteria. And also a big thing for us is adding more than money. So we don't see ourselves as just a check investor. We have a wide network of people that can actually help the business achieve their growth plans. But it's really important for companies, to vet their funder and to check that their interests and their goals are aligned as to what they want. Because, like I say, it's a distraction, it's time consuming. We totally get that, but we try and make it as easy as possible. But we have seen, unfortunately, instances where companies have taken on the wrong money for them, and then it just has really impacted them later on.
Yeah, and I'd echo everything Louise has said there. There are so many different funders out there, but the most important advice I give to teams when I'm speaking to them is speak to different people, find the right fit for you. What do you need within your business? What are you looking for from an investor? Because if you if you just want the capital, then actually someone who's actually going to bring more to the table probably isn't right for you. Whereas if you're looking for something a little bit more, the person that just brings a check and doesn't have sort of the broader team and infrastructure within their organisation behind them, then that might not be for you. So it's it's setting out at the outset, what is it that you want from a funder, because funders like ourselves, we've got a huge value enhancement team, big portfolio team. We're set up, we're geared up to help companies, whether that be on sustainability, digital marketing, recruitment, people strategy, whatever. If they're the sorts of things that people are looking for out of a funder at the moment, then we're a good person to speak to. Whereas if you just after capital and don't want to see your funder for the next 3 years, then probably not for us. But it's just it's making sure that you find the right one for you and doing the referencing as well. I think that's important. Speak to all the people in the portfolio, investments that have gone well, investments that haven't necessarily gone well as well. I think that's important, because I think everybody is very good when times are good, but I guess it's seeing how people are and react when things don't necessarily always don't go to plan. I think that's important to find out as well.
Yeah, it sounds like it's all about relationship, isn't it? So and what sectors are you seeing sort of the most demand from, or the most deals taking place in? I know tech is a bit of a sexy sector and we see lots happening, but are there other sectors where you guys are sort of doing deals in that we're not sort of hearing about, or we should be hearing more from?
Yeah, so we've seen quite a lot in environmental consultancy recently, and you mentioned Shalina Amphesis, which was transacted just over a year ago. That's a global sustainability consultancy working with blue chips and councils on their net zero carbon strategy. But we've seen a number of companies, not necessarily in the sustainability space, but environmental services companies, and new Environment Act came out last year, and more stringent regulation coming into force over the next 12 months. And I guess off the back of what we're seeing in the broader market with COP26, sentiment across society, people are starting to realise that actually we need to take care of our earth, and we need to start doing it a lot quicker. So we've seen quite a number of environmental services type businesses come in over the last 12 months or so, and hoping to do something in that sector relatively shortly.
Right, thanks, Greg. Well, we're just coming to an end of this session now. Thank you both so much for your time. If there's any businesses out there, you know what to do next. Again, thank you, Louise and Greg. We're going to move on to our next session. This time, I'm speaking to Ed Thompson, who is a CTO and co-founder of Moulton. Manchester-based Moulton helps make businesses make sense of their data. And last year, the firm raised $150 million in a deal that propelled it to unicorn status. So let's hear from Ed. Ed, welcome, and thank you for joining us today. Just tell us a little bit about what Moulton does, Ed, and how it's making sense of data.
Yeah, sure. So Moulton's mission is to make the world's data useful. So what does that mean? Well, fundamentally, we're a data integration company, and typically modern companies have lots and lots of different silos of data, and we allow them to centralize that data and then process that data into useful data. And by useful for businesses, that really means data that is ready for analytics.
Clearly, you guys have been on a bit of a journey yourself. You launched in 2011 and gone through several, funding rounds. And tell us, at what point did the business realise it needed to go for its first funding round? And what was that process like for you as a sort of growing, newish business?
Yeah, so Moulton did what I guess in sort of the investor landscape parlance, or the Silicon Valley parlance, is a pivot. We originally set up the business quite close to what we do today, but not exactly the same. So we started a business with an idea that we would be able to deliver business intelligence solutions. And At the time we started Moulton, big businesses had very sophisticated reporting. So you'd expect a supermarket, for example, to have very sophisticated reporting systems so they know where all their stock is at any one time, how much they're selling at any one time, and that would change on a day-to-day basis. But small companies didn't have that. So the idea was, well, let's try and use some of the new cloud technology that was coming on stream. We were talking about probably like the fourth or fifth year where AWS was a kind of gathering pace. Let's use some of that new cloud technology to deliver business intelligence systems for small, medium enterprises in the UK. And we did that for 4 or 5 years. And it was kind of we weren't massively successful at it, but neither did we fail at it. What we realized was that in order to make that business work, we needed to get more and more efficient at building what's known as the data warehouse. Data warehouse is the underlying data structures that power analytics in businesses. So we get really good at building data warehouses. We can do this, and we can make it work as a business. So what we decided to do was to develop some of our own tools, particularly for doing the transformation part of the data, as well as kind of the moving of the data around. And it was probably about 2014 we started developing it. 2015 got to a point where we were using the tool internally, and it wasn't a very big leap to think, well, actually, we can sell this tool to other businesses that have the same problem. So we launched what became Moulton ETL, which is our kind of core product. We launched that at reInvent, which is kind of Amazon's big tech trade show in Las Vegas in 2015. And that was the point, really, once we kind of got the feedback from that and realized that there were lots of potential customers all around the world and lots in the States, and I think our first customer was in Australia, we realized that we needed to scale the business to one that could have that sort of international reach and had the power behind it to serve these new types of customer. And that's when we got on the kind of Silicon Valley funding train, if you like, with our Series A round.
But essentially, you started the funding raise in Silicon Valley and not here in Manchester, is that right?
Yeah, actually, our first funding round was from a UK Northwest venture capitalist. I should be clear on that. But what I mean when I say it put us on the kind of this, when you choose to take a venture capital funding, venture capitalists expect a high growth business. So you then need to deliver a high growth business. So it's once you kind of get on the escalator, that's kind of you've set the wheels in motion at that point, and then that allowed us then to go for our B and C and D and E round were led by major Silicon Valley investors.
Right, and what was that experience like for you guys? And you got your initial investment from the North, where you're making quite a leap and quite a journey to that next stage. What was that experience like for you guys still as a growing business?
I mean, as with all things in life, if you're not prepared to accept that you've got to learn every day and then learn some more, it's not going to work out. And that was the situation we found ourselves in. We had to learn very quickly about the ins and outs of fundraising and the various pitfalls and the whole kind of language and nomenclature that comes along with it, and what everything means and what it means for founders. And the bits of information that are difficult are getting an inside understanding of what good looks like and what bad looks like. What is a good offer, what is a good contract versus what is a poor offer, and you enter the process with none of that knowledge, so you kind of have to calibrate as you go along and figure out what's right for the business. We see there's a lot of funding that goes on right now where businesses are with quite small amounts of revenue are getting very, very large valuations, and that's fine as long as the business can at some point make up that valuation. But very often you could take more money than you needed and end up in a difficult place. So you got to figure out what's the right amount, what's the amount that you need, and what's the amount that allows you to fulfill your ambitions and compete on the stage that you've chosen, which for Moulton is international, essentially.
Were you guys always successful in each round that you went for, or did you have knockbacks? And what was that process like?
Every funding process is always a roller coaster. Any venture capitalist that you speak to has a million ways that they can say no, and really only a very small number of ways in which they can say yes. And there's quite a lot of good venture capitalists out there, and probably some not very good ones as well. It's kind of a bit like dating, really. You want to work, you're going to have to work with them, and that venture capitalist firm is going to put people on the board of the company, and you're going to be I'm the CTO, but the CEO is going to be answerable to them, and essentially, you need to choose people that you can work well with over a long period of time.
The relationship, isn't it? It's not just about this game of money. It's making sure that the relationship's going to work for you and the funders.
Yeah, absolutely. And Moulton is fundamentally a values-based business. We wrote down the Moulton values on the second day of the company, and so anyone that we work that closely with, who's going to come and invest in Moulton, needs to very closely align with those values. Otherwise, at some point, we're going to get ourselves into a difficult situation. So, as a strongly kind of our values DNA running through the company, we really think about that when we're talking to investors and trying to figure out if they're the right investors to work with. And we've been very lucky to find some fantastic investors who have really kind of majored on those values, actually.
So last year was quite a milestone year for you guys, and it was capped off with $150 million of funding last September. What did that mean for the business? Because in Manchester, you became our latest unicorn, and all eyes are on you guys now. So what did that mean for you guys as a business?
I mean, it's a fantastic place for the business to be in, and it's a fantastic opportunity. When you set out to do these things, you think about wanting to achieve something. You're thinking about, we often use the phrase kind of, create a dent in the universe. It's bigger than ourselves. You mostly think about the team and the people that you can take in along with you on that journey, but you don't think about the destinations or the mileposts really along the way all that much. You just work to do the absolute best you can. So reaching the kind of the Series E and the valuation of the company going up to 1.5 billion is amazing. And of course, it comes with its own pressure because we need to fulfill that valuation. We need to keep the business growing at the rate that the new inbound investors expect. But yeah, we never spend enough time kind of stopping and looking out the window at the scenery, if you know what I mean. And if we did, I think it would be a very proud moment when you do. But as always, the day job comes around, and there's lots and lots of things to do and lots of things to improve, and there's always lots of people to hire and processes to run. The business has got to constantly improve in every way, improving its people, improving the processes for each of these kind of funding stages. They don't just happen without transformation, constant change.
Yeah, absolutely. And talk about different stages of funding. You've spent a lot of time in Silicon Valley. You've gone through various stages of the business, and it's a different culture, isn't it, in Silicon Valley when it comes to funding? It's almost as though people, they know the language, they know what to expect, they're sort of like trained towards getting that kind of funding. Whereas maybe in the UK, it's a bit different, in school, in high school, in college, kids, they don't learn about money, they don't learn about funding and what to expect. Whereas the cultures might be slightly different in the US. Would you say that's the case?
Definitely, absolutely, and I certainly that would be my primary observation, and almost part of the reason why Moulton went to Silicon Valley, particularly for its kind of latter funding rounds, because there is that culture in place, and it's not just the investment culture and the investment environment that's created. It's also in a lot of the cultural differences between the people that we hire in the UK and the US. We always hire to our values, so these are all fantastic Moultoners, but we do notice that there's a lot more education to do in the UK on what it means to be in the sort of business that Moulton is, and have stock options, and what those stock options will do over time, and what they could do and what they couldn't do, and how that works and what that means. Spend a lot more time, I think, explaining that in the UK, whereas US employees are very used to that sort of ownership part of the company, having options, understanding all the kind of various tax implications and things like that happen. So big kind of cultural difference there. For me, it's something that I'd like to see change in the UK. I'd like to see a much better understanding of how you build and grow businesses, and the different models for doing that could be explored at a much younger age in the UK. And I think that would perhaps help promote a more entrepreneurial culture than we currently have. And hopefully, the ultimate aim should be there's no reason why some of the all the tech giants of the world have to be in America. The UK has the people and it has, the intellectual capacity to build an Amazon or a Google or even a Facebook Meta. But what it doesn't, I don't think, have right now is the right kind of cultural investment environment to get us there.
Do you think that might be changing? You can take Manchester, for example, and you guys are a Manchester-based business. Is attracting a lot more techie firms. It's doing a lot more in terms around skills. Do you think that might change in places like Manchester or on that journey already, do you think?
I think so. I mean, I'm naturally an optimist, right? If you start a business, you're naturally an optimist. So I think hopefully Moulton can be part of the change. Ultimately, we having conversations like this means that we can explain how these things can be done. And of course, technology has always broken down barriers. So the differences in investment climate and culture gradually start to bleed across borders. Silicon Valley's turn it around. Part of the problem Silicon Valley has with culture is that it's a little bit too insular. So they're very good at investing in businesses that are just down the road, even though they would always describe themselves as forward-thinking and international. There's quite a lot of work going on there to reach out further and invest in businesses in the UK, across Europe, across Israel, Australia, Far East. I mean, you see that happening as well. So there's probably a little bit of meat in the middle there as well, which I think could really benefit.
Yeah, that's great to hear. And finally, we've got loads of great businesses in the Northwest, loads of like up-and-coming tech businesses. And not all business start off because they want to become a unicorn and raise millions of pounds. For those businesses who might be on that growth journey and looking for investment, what would your advice be?
So the investment climate right now is a fantastic place for big, ambitious ideas. So I think the best advice would be, don't be short of ambition and don't think that the world is bigger than technology makes it. If you have a product that you can successfully sell to one person in one place, is there anything that's stopping you from selling that product to everyone right around the world, for example? And that's the kind of mindset that you'd find in Silicon Valley. And that's the kind of mindset that we need here. So, big, ambitious ideas, thinking as big as you possibly can. And, for the people with the big ideas that can prove that they have a product that fits a market, there's good funding from really high quality investors available to take that and turn that into a large and successful business. So that would probably be my biggest piece of advice is with UK companies, very often they're nervous about thinking really big, and there's definitely scope out there for lots of big ideas.
Thanks, Ed. So be brave, be big, think big, and just go for it. That's some great advice there, Ed.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for your time today and for sharing your insights. That was Ed Thompson from Moulton, whose advice is think big, take your ideas and take it forward. Right, so our next session is going to, I'll be speaking to Bobby Thandi. Bobby is the founder and chief executive of SR Games, a fast-growing virtual reality games developer which has successfully secured backing from regional funds and investors over several funding rounds. And welcome, Bobby.
Hello, how are you doing?
Hi, Bobby, I hope you're good. So Bobby, you're going to do a presentation for us first. So shall we start with that?
For sure. Can you see my screen in full screen mode?
Yes.
Excellent. Cool. I'll crack on. So as just mentioned, I'm Bobby Thandi, founder and CEO of XR Games. We're a game development studio focusing on virtual reality and augmented reality. This short presentation is just going to run through what to expect when raising funding for your game studio. And hopefully there are lessons in here that are applicable to anyone raising funding. So I'm going to cover off 3 different sections. Basically, where do you start? What do you need to get ready before investment? And red and green flags regarding potential investors. So beginning off, where do you start? When creating a game studio, I personally believe you need to create what we call the golden triangle foundation. So you have one friend who covers off all things business, one friend who can cover off all things tech, and another who can cover off all things creative. And with these three people coming together, you now have the foundation with which you can build out your game studio. Obviously, you're going to need to raise investment funding if you're going to build out a team. So when raising investment funding, the first time I did that, I sat down and started with a blank piece of paper. It's like, where the hell do I start? Personally, I started here. Start with why. So this is a great book by Simon Sinek. If you haven't read it, I highly recommend it. With your why, you will have the purpose, you'll have the resilience, you'll have the belief in understanding what this entire journey is about. Because I've heard running a startup is like being repeatedly punched in the face, punctuated with intense highs on a daily basis. But if you have a strong why, a strong belief, a strong purpose, you can get knocked down 9 times and you'll have the resilience to get up 10. My why began here. So this is a game from back in the day called Bubble Bobble. It was the first game that I completed with my friend Steve. Half the fun was playing a really fun game, and the other half of the fun was being able to turn around in real life to my friend Steve and doing a high five when we completed a level, or a playful punch in the ribs if somebody messed up. And that was what made gaming so much fun for me. Half was the game and half was the in real life fun, whereby you cooperatively play with a friend or relative. And so much so was my love of cooperative games that when I was the vice president of digital at a previous game studio called Dubbit, I went out and secured the license for Mashed and the Bear. It's one of the top-rated animation series on YouTube, and both of my kids were very much in love with this animation series. So I went out, secured the license, and I made a cooperative game whereby 2 children could play the same game on the same tablet at the same time. And it fills me with so much joy that not only do my kids love this game and love cooperative gaming, but we've even had over 1 million installs. So you think about the fact that that's 1 million households, 2 kids playing it at least. So that's over 2 million players playing it, which is great. Fast forward to when the Oculus Dev Kit came out. It absolutely blew my socks away. It was the first time I was now able to step into the gaming experience. It was a brand new medium, and this was better than the dreams of when I was a kid. I've now stepped into the gaming experience. And then I kind of had the thought that, oh my God, imagine now I could step into a game experience with my friend Steve, and we're both playing the game inside Bubble Bobble, and we can turn to each other and do high fives or take the mickey out of each other if one of us messes up. And the fact that my friends are now scattered around the globe, I have that intense sense of presence. So social games I could see as being a big thing when I first got my hands on this Oculus Dev Kit. So that was the makings of XR Games. When I played that dev kit, I really wanted to create a game studio that focused on virtual reality. And that, my why, plus the technology, is where our mission statement comes from. It's through play that people make some of their most meaningful and lasting memories, especially with friends and family. XR Games exist to make games that create those moments. This very powerful mission statement is what we hold our games to. And if we're playing a game during development and it doesn't hit on this mission statement, we'll go back to the drawing board and ensure that when we do play the game, it does live up to our mission statement. Now, thinking back to the Golden Triangle Foundation, do you really need 2 other friends to kind of create your game studio with? The answer is no. There are some insanely talented lone developers out there. Take my friend Dante Buckley, the good-looking chap on the left here. He dropped out of university because when he first got his hands on the Oculus Dev Kit, he's like, I love this. And he also loves first-person shooter, tactical shooter games. And he set about creating that game. He learned how to code from YouTube. He bought assets from the Unity asset store and began to pull together his own game. Fast forward a year and he launched Onward. It was a mega success straight out of the gate. And he used the money from the game to build out his studio. And he built it up to a studio of about 40 odd people. It got acquired by Facebook last year when he was only aged 24. And he did it his own way. There's no investors to report to. There's no board of directors to report to. So it is possible to do it all by yourself. But unlike many other companies, that you do need to raise funding. So if you do need to do what I did, so what do you need to get ready before investment? Clearly, if you've had previous success, then it's going to be very simple for you to raise investment, and you'll be able to do it off simply creating an investor pitch deck. If you don't have past success, when you're creating your investor pitch deck, what I tend to do is lean on credentials. What have you or your team done in a previous life that will help explain and help prove to investors that you are a team worth betting on? Also, what I found to be super important when chatting to investors is, what's your story? If you can tell a compelling narrative, it will get investors' interest. And with that compelling narrative, hopefully you can kind of progress through the journey of raising investment funding. So I'll just share a couple of slides from my investor pitch deck that helped explain the story of why I was trying to raise investment funding for a VR game studio. So some of you may be aware of this, but every 15 years, we've had a new tech center. We went from mainframes to PC to web to smartphones. All the big tech companies are thinking, what's next? And they're spending billions believing it'll be XR glasses. So all the big tech firms are creating this. There's many rumors about when Apple's XR glasses will land. Some say within a couple of years, some say a year and a half, let's see. But the point is that Tim Cook believes that it's the next big thing and it'll pervade our entire lives. And we've already seen that Mark Zuckerberg has pivoted his entire business to be called Meta, because that's how much they believe in the metaverse, and they believe it'll be accessed through XR glasses. And we're in conversations with all the other tech firms on here, and we're aware of their XR glasses coming down the pipeline. And the entire point of those two slides is just basically get across to investors that, hey, this is a big fucking deal. It's going to be a big market and you should be interested. Thinking back about what else you need to kind of convince investors that you should have a playable demo, a proof of concept. Without that, you haven't got much chance of raising investment. And with a playable demo or a prototype, obviously to go from that to a shippable product is a significant challenge. So don't expect investors to be falling over themselves to invest, but it should give you a better standing than just having an idea, because everyone's just got an idea. So once you've done your successful pitch deck, you've got a narrative, you've got your why, you've got your playable demo, you convince some investors to give you some money. This is when you've got the time and space to go away and create a product. We created Angry Birds Under Pressure, and I'm pleased to say it was delivered on time, on budget, and to critical acclaim. And by doing this, it put XR Games on the map. And although it took me a year and a half to close the deal with Rovio and Sony Pictures, who made the movie, just be rest assured that once you've kind of delivered on one element of success, it becomes easier to close other deals. So, for example, Zombieland Headshot, the IP Zombieland, which is owned by Sony Pictures, I secured this IP over a drink in Vegas with Sony Pictures. We set about creating the game, and it actually launched March last year. And not only was it delivered on time, on budget, and to critical acclaim, it's also been a mega commercial hit for us as well. And what comes with a commercial hit is that now investors are chasing after me. So I've always had to chase after investors, but once you have a few hits under your belt, and you can prove you can generate cash, investors will be after you. When you get to the fortunate position of investors chasing you and receiving multiple acquisition offers, the one thing to bear in mind, or what I do anyways, is ensure that the investors I'm speaking with, that their values align with the values that we hold dear at XR Games. Because you're in it for the long haul, it's going to be a 7, 8, 9 year journey with the investors, so make sure that their values align with yours. So red and green flags regarding potential investors. Sounds daft, but ensure that they have the money. Back in the day when I was chasing after investors, I was wasting time and energy with one particular investor who, it transpired, didn't actually have the money. He was trying to raise funds himself, and he was trying to show to his potential investors that he had these exciting startups to invest in. So do your homework, check the LinkedIn mutual connections, and just ensure that they have made some investments already. Have follow-on money. If friends and family and angel funds aside, if you're dealing with VC investors, ensure that they have follow-on money, because you're going to be doing multiple rounds of investment throughout the journey of your company. And if the investor has follow-on money, it makes it a lot easier to do follow-on rounds. Ensure they're nice people. Listen to your gut. If your gut's telling you that this person might be a dickhead, move on, regardless of how much you might need the money. Awesome network. Can the investor elevate your business through their contacts as part of the getting the know you phrase? There may be some certain companies you're trying to get into. Could they potentially open that door? Founder friendly. are the investors entrepreneurs themselves? Do they understand the highs and lows? This will really stand out to you if that's the case. And have they got your back? An example of that is that they might set aside 10% of the equity pool for growth shares, because they want you and your entire team to participate in the upside that will come your way. And the fact that they're diluting themselves to provide this is a great sign that they've actually got your back, that they want you and your entire team to succeed. Sounds super simple, but see how fast they are to respond to messages. The faster they are, indicated to me that there was a stronger sense of willingness to try and get a deal done. Very fast to get to a term sheet, or does it take them weeks? Find out from them how long it will take to get to a term sheet, and check with other portfolio founders, like how do they stick to the timelines that they mentioned, and what are the timelines it takes to get through the certain gates in terms of term sheet, shareholders agreement, articles association, due diligence phase, cash in bank, etc. 100% trust. An example might be an introduction to a possible chairperson, an advisor, or non-executive director. Just really stood out to me there, sharing and opening up their network. And the deal might not go ahead, but at least you walk away with a valuable contact moving forward. And obviously realize it's a two-way street, that said person will be feeding back to the investors in terms of whether or not they think you're an investable person or company. Deep sector expertise. Some investors may just provide money, they'll provide other value benefits as well, whereas other investors maybe have deep sector expertise in your industry. If so, they could possibly introduce you to their portfolio founders, within which you can create a great network of other CEOs, because there'll be some things you don't want to share with the board, or some things you don't want to share with the team, but you can share and relate with other CEOs in the same industry as yourself. And then finally, are they able to read between the lines? You'll know it when you see it, but watch out for investors who can piece together truths from what you've not said. This really does separate the super smart investors from just the smart ones. Thank you very much. If you want to get in contact, please do so. My details are on screen there, or via LinkedIn if you wish to do so.
That was really interesting, Bobby, and it's great to hear that investors are chasing you now. So complete flip from like when you started. Some brilliant advice there as well, Bobby. Can I ask, like, what is next for XR Games, and what's the ambitions for 2022 and beyond? You've been very successful with your fundraising, some really brilliant games. Masha the Bear, I remember it very well because I've got two little ones. So yeah, so what's next for you guys?
Good question. So we're about just touching 60 people now. I'm closing another round of investment to scale even more aggressively. We're in like 4,000 square feet here. We're moving into a new studio, which is 12,000 square feet. And with the 8 projects we're currently doing in parallel now, versus just one project in January last year, working on bigger IPs, bigger projects, bigger budgets. And, with the huge uptake in VR numbers, especially with the Quest 2 headset over Christmas. Super excited with regards to what the future entails, and can't wait to announce the types of projects that we're working on. And we're beginning to develop much closer relationship with the big platform owners as well. So just bigger, better, and larger, I guess.
Yeah, sounds very exciting. Do let us know what your next big projects are for you. Let anyone else know, Bobby. But good to have you with us today. And again, thank you for sharing all your insights. Definitely been really interesting, certainly for me. Thanks again, Bobby.
Awesome. Thank you. Cheers. Take care. Bye now.
Right, so we're going to move on to our next session, finding and funding the North's fast growth firms. We all know a healthy ecosystem is vital to give those companies with high growth strategies the very best chance of maximizing their potential. To look at that further, we have a brilliant panel joining us today. First up, we've got Ken Cooper, who is MD of Venture Solutions at the British Business Bank. Hi, Ken.
Hello.
We also got Bod Buckby, who is Head of UK Primary Markets at London Stock Exchange, looking after the north of the UK.
Good afternoon.
Hi, Bod. And also Josh Robson, who is from the Scale Up Institute. Hi, Josh.
Hi,
and finally, Simon French, MD at Panmure Gordon. Hi,
Hi,
Simon.
good afternoon.
Hi, welcome, everybody. I might just quickly ask everybody, and just go around, I'll say around the table, but I say around my screen. How has the pandemic affected funding landscape? And I'll start with you, Ken.
Thanks, Shalene. I think the biggest impact of the pandemic has probably come from actually some of the schemes that the Treasury put together, many of which have been run by British Business Bank, to help businesses get through the pandemic. So we've seen the coronavirus business loans, we've seen bounce back loans, we've seen the Future Fund, and I think the reason that's had an ongoing impact is that actually a lot of businesses that perhaps might not have looked for external finance before have kind of had to do it, and are perhaps now better able to see the benefits of actually not trying to do everything on your own and getting a bit more money in, helping to fuel that growth. And I think we're now hopefully coming out, and it's the growth and the rebuilding that's also going to need that funding.
Thanks, Ken. And moving on to you, Bod.
Well, I think that the impact of the pandemic was initially everything stopped. People were just unsure about what the impact was going to be on their business, and deals and a lot of fundraising stopped. But that lasted only days, actually, and very, very quickly we saw the first companies on the public market approach investors and say, we think we're going to need additional capital to survive the pandemic. And investors were very quick to support those businesses and help them through. And that then really continued into, from a quite a defensive initially, a wave of recapitalization into growth and looking for where the opportunities in the new post-pandemic world were going to be, with more digital, more equality, a greater focus on ESG. And so what we've seen is a huge wave now of IPOs that have taken place, companies approaching the markets for the first time to fund their growth plans. And we saw last year more IPOs than we saw in either of the previous years combined. So there's now a real surge of funding off the back of the pandemic.
Thanks, Boy. We'll definitely talk a bit more about those IPOs in a bit. Moving on to you, Simon.
Yeah, I mean, I think if we're looking at it from a private market perspective and private companies, after that initial hiatus that Bod referred to there, the demand for capital from these companies was very, very strong, and it was delivered pretty effectively as well. I think, the stats show that sort of through the second half of 2020 and into 2021, I think the amount of growth capital that was delivered in the north of England grew substantially on the prior periods. So from that perspective, I think, post that hiatus, demand for capital very strong, but also the supply of capital was very strong. And I think just touching on the public markets, the efficiency of the public markets was really brought to the fore, particularly in the weeks immediately following lockdown, when there really was a demand for capital from some companies to bolster their balance sheets, and particularly companies listed on AIM, were able to raise that capital very, very quickly and very, very efficiently.
Thanks, Simon. And finally, Josh.
Thanks very much. And I think obviously the pandemic had sort of a substantial impact across all businesses in the way that they sort of perceive the world and the funding environment in particular. But I think during the pandemic, we saw sort of scale-ups actually still pretty boisterous about their growth and looking ahead and looking at how they could grow in the future and adopting new technology pretty quickly. I mean, we know there's just shy of sort of 7,000 scale-ups in the North overall. And I think that of those, we've seen substantial numbers adopt different technologies and sort of aim to keep those business practices and the things that they've changed in scope as they sort of look forward. But we also know that actually during that period, and we do quite an active survey on this with business leaders, we know that sort of roughly half of scale-up leaders in the North think that actually most funding is still outside of the North, and it's kind of more focused around London and the South East. So I think whilst there's very, very much positive sort of inflow of money, and I think that's clear from the Small Business Finance Markets report released yesterday, it is still a bit patchy, and there's also some work to do around the perception of that funding.
Yeah, and just staying on that theme, I mean, as it all our panelists today, how do we change that perception. You know, there is, people seem to be going to the south of England for that funding when there are companies here that can provide that. How do we, you know, close the gap, shall I say? And you know, the levelling up agenda is going to help in that.
So I think, Chelina, that's something that we think about a lot. It's part of the reason that the Northern Powerhouse Investment Fund exists, because I think it's not entirely perception. There is more money in the south. There is at the moment a little less money in the north, but there is money, and there will be money where we have more money for when the Northern Powerhouse Investment Fund stops investing. But I think one of the best things we can do is actually show success, because you know investors are not operating just in London, but they're operating it possibly in London because they're there and because that's where they think the deals are. And I think the more we show success in the north, the more we attract other funders to come and look and see what we're doing.
And Simon, would you agree with that?
Yeah, I think probably the pandemic showed it didn't necessarily matter where the companies were and where the capital was, because a lot of these deals, or in a vast majority of deals, were being conducted and completed virtually. So I think there needs to be a certain sort of broad approach from companies as to where they source the capital. I think there tends to be better alignment if you're finding that capital in a local geographic area, for sure. And I think, you know, success does beget success, as Ken said. But I think at the same time, Manchester has more private equity firms with offices in it than any other city in Europe, apart from London and Frankfurt. So, you know, there is plenty of capital available locally. The challenge, as always, is if you're the entrepreneur or you're the management team, you know, how do I know where that capital is, and how do I go about finding it?
Yeah, seems to me from the conversations I've been having today, it seems to be an education piece missing in this sort of space. You know, I think if you heard Ed Thompson-Matillion talk about them going out for fundraising, the language can be a bit some of these entrepreneurs, they don't understand what's a good deal, what's not a bad deal. So do you think, you know, there's a lot more work to be done in that area?
Yeah, I think we can always do better as a sort of, you know, funding ecosystem. But I think those challenges, you know, you've mentioned aren't unique just to the north of England. I think, you know, the clear challenge from my perspective is actually there's a lot of capital around sort of seed stage companies and seed stage raises. But actually the real challenge is as companies move from trying to fund a seed round through to a Series A, and perhaps they haven't hit all their milestones, and their initial investors don't have follow-on capital. You know, that is potentially where the biggest challenge is for companies.
Right, thank you. And something else that you mentioned a bit earlier as well. You know, last year we saw, you know, a lot of activity taking place, loads of deals happening, loads of, you know, mergers, acquisitions, and fundraising. Would you say that's because of the pandemic? You know, people trying to get deals done before the next lockdown, before, you know, the next budget, and do you think that's going to tail off this year?
No, I think, you know, there's many sort of motivations for doing deals and for deal activity sort of hitting pause, and uncertainty is always a big problem for financial markets and deploying capital. But I think funders and companies have got better at navigating the external shocks that seem to come our way on a very regular basis these days. I think the bigger challenge is potentially the cost of capital starting to increase. And we've seen, you know, 10 years of very cheap capital and some very supportive programs that have enabled early stage companies to flourish. I think as that capital potentially becomes significantly more expensive, then that poses a potential challenge for companies accessing it, and whether funders will be so keen to deploy it on what otherwise may be marginal investments. And then I think the other challenge that companies face is clearly we're moving into an operating environment where costs have risen and are rising extremely rapidly at the same time as the demand picture is starting to look a little bit weaker, you know, with tax rises and the other shocks, you know, potentially there from those tax rises impacting on disposable income.
Yeah, it should be quite an interesting year to see what actually happens, especially with other rises such as raw materials and freight costs, etc. But just moving on to, I know you mentioned the activity in the IPO market. We had some great sort of Manchester Northern businesses, Team 17, North Coders, Music Magpie, all listing last year. What was the appetite? Like, what was driving the appetite to do that? And again, do we see the same thing happening this year?
So I think there's an element of pent-up demand from companies. I think that we've been seeing for some time actually a pipeline of companies that were keen to come and join the public markets and IPO, and we seem to go from political uncertainty through to Brexit to the pandemic. So once that had all cleared, I think there was a really good window for people to finally get those deals done. We can see a continuation, though, of companies looking to do that. I think partly as a result of the shock, really, that the pandemic caused in terms of people reassessing what normal meant in their business and how much resilience they need to build into their business and their plans in order to succeed. And I think we're seeing that now with some of the geopolitical instability and uncertainty, that again, having access to the public markets to be able to tap quickly and efficiently if you need more capital to get through a difficult period, or indeed that you see an acquisition that you want to do and want to be able to move quickly, having an easy, ready access to those public markets is quite valuable.
Yeah, can also be a bit challenging as well. If you look at the Hook Group, for example, it's been a bit of a volatile year. So, as attractive as it is, it's not always smooth sailing, is it?
No, and likewise in the public and private markets, that can be the case.
Yeah, thanks, Bob. And Josh, you obviously work with loads of scale-ups. What's the biggest challenges for scale-ups in accessing that kind of funding, and what kind of gap are you guys seeing?
Well, I mean, I think part of the work we did during the pandemic was actually looking at the gap and particularly latent potential across the whole of the UK. And one of the things we found was that whilst there is sort of an availability of funding, it can be quite patchy in terms of where that actually resides and what that then turns into. And we sort of found in work we did with Treasury back in sort of 2021 that actually there's a sort of latent potential gap of about 5 billion in unfunded opportunities across the region, which is actually, it's a positive number. That's a number which can only really go up. But I think it's something which just speaks to the sort of the scale of gap that can exist at different stages of the life cycle when you're thinking about that continuum of funding right the way through. Also, when we've been doing some broader work on angel investment, we know that actually when you look at the way that angels invest across the UK, we can see that across sort of 3 regions, so the Northwest, sort of the West Midlands and the Southwest, the total funded sort of amount that goes in per year is less than a single angel group in sort of the Golden Triangle area, which again speaks to the opportunity which is out there to really sort of encourage these companies and engage with these companies as they seek to grow. I mean, I think the companies which are out there and the barriers they see, markets is actually often one of the big challenges. And that is very closely related to funding. But in terms of the barriers they see to their overarching growth, access to market has been a consistently rising challenge. And I think that's something which often needs to be coupled, certainly when people are considering the funding journeys for companies and also the companies themselves and the programs they might need to advance. What it actually is that they need is a joined up ecosystem around them to enable their growth over the longer term. And I think that's often sort of something which can be sort of missed out when people look at the opportunities that are out there. What is it that actually enables a company to get to market, to get their ideas into there and to fund the innovation that they're undertaking as well?
Yeah, I mean, one for everyone, is there a joined up ecosystem in the north? And if not, what can we do about it? Is there any other countries that we could be looking at as a prime example of doing it well?
I think that the North overall has got quite a lot of active programs in engaging with scale-ups and looking at the way that scale-ups can grow. I mean, there's a whole range of programs, including sort of the things from the growth company and the way in which they're looking at the international growth program. That's critical. There's Scale Up Northeast in the Northeast, which is doing lots of really good work breaking down barriers. And there's a range of programs across Liverpool and it also in Leeds, looking at the way in which scale ups themselves engage in, whether it's to do with innovation or whether it's to do with access to management and training. I think the challenge is often connecting these things up from the point of view of the business. and making sure that the business themselves have the opportunity to connect with these programs at the right stage, and then making sure that is then referred into the broader funding dynamic. And we often talk about the importance of relationship managers in connection to this, and that's something which I know is being deployed increasingly at a local level. I think that the point that comes alongside this, and as sort of broader programs such as I'm sure Ken will talk about in relation to the Northern Powerhouse Investment Fund, is making sure that those broader opportunities for funding are really part of that joined up ecosystem and are fully connected into it. So I know that's something which is happening increasingly through Innovate UK Edge, and also things which the British Business Bank are doing with their UK network team. So I think it's just really about bringing all of the goodwill and all of the connections that are taking place to that next level, and making sure that businesses really do have a seamless journey so that they don't see barriers to their growth when they have the opportunity to do so.
Thanks, Josh. Bob, were you going to say something then?
Yeah, I mean, my take on that, the original question is, does the North have a joined up ecosystem? And I think it kind of depends on who you ask. So for every company that I'll speak to that's had a fantastic experience of going through seed, fund A, B, C, and coming through to private equity or the public markets, there'll be another that has struggled in some way and has found it difficult to navigate. I think that's more often around having the right advisors around the company to help give a holistic view on all of the options out there, because it is a complex picture now. And once a company has got the appropriate advisors, that is a big step to understanding and being able to navigate the funding network.
Yeah, I guess it's understanding as well what works for that individual company as well. So there is quite a lot out there. I mean, Ken, how do you feel about the ecosystem? And you guys do work with a lot of funders across the North.
Yeah, I mean the ecosystem is incredibly important. And saying that, I'm then going to say that the ecosystem generally is not something that we do, particularly within NPIF. What we are doing is looking at providing the funding opportunities, which actually I think is a very big part of the equation, because if you don't have the opportunity to there's no point a corporate finance firm working with an SME to look for funding if there's no funding. So the funding really helps to build the ecosystem. What our UK network team does is it's kind of act a little like the hydraulic fluid in a system, in making sure these things are connected. We don't sort of provide that advice directly to people. We don't provide the sort of one-to-one advice that you might get from a corporate finance advisor or a growth hub or something. But we do, through our website, provide sort of general advice and try and point people at where to go to. But I think one of the things that I would say, because it's not just the Northern Powerhouse Fund that I'm responsible for a number of funds across the country. And one of the advantages we see in the North is that the type of funding we provide has been provided, albeit at a smaller scale, over a number of years now. And that actually does allow that ecosystem to develop. Now, there's always going to be an issue with companies not really knowing where to look and not knowing what the best advice is and the right advice. And again, that's something that I think, when you have success and when you develop sort of clusters of successful businesses, getting advice from a business like yours is probably one of the best ways of getting advice. And so we're sort of building that. I certainly, I wouldn't want to sound negative at all, because I think, we've seen over the last few years, we've seen what's happened in Manchester, for example, and there's absolutely no reason that that's actually already starting to happen in places like Leeds and Sheffield, and it can happen across the North. We're fueling the start of that. And I mean, for example, we've invested about 310 million on the Northern Powerhouse Investment Fund. The private sector has invested over 400 million alongside us. So the money's there, and that all feeds on itself and grows into the next system.
Thanks, Ken. One of these sort of trends that we've seen over the last year, and it's building over a couple of years, is sort of the low carbon green economy. What kind of impact does that have on funding? What are funders looking out for? I know, like, we've got the green mark on the the markets. Is that quite a big area?
It's a very real issue, and it's one that no company can really afford to ignore. I think one of the things that particularly with sort of early stage venture funding that we find is we tend to be ahead of the politics, in that businesses are seeing those opportunities and funders are seeing the opportunity to back those businesses. But absolutely, it's important. I think it's one of those things that will come more and more to the fore, and those people that start addressing the needs now will have a bit of a head start in the future.
Yeah. Well, it's odd. I mean, it's been quite big on the markets as well. I mean, like Music Magpie got their green economy mark last year, and that was quite a big thing, especially for shareholders as well, like investors, what they were looking for.
Yeah, absolutely. And companies like Libertine and CPH2, the hydrogen business, so this has become huge, actually. So from a few years ago, it was very much on the periphery in terms of the green economy. Last year, if those green economy mark companies were a sector in their own right, they would have been the 4th largest sector on the London Stock Exchange by capital raised last year. So it's become enormous, and the weight of capital that is actively focused and can only invest in green economy businesses is enormous. So this is, I would say, the number one trend and priority of the public markets currently.
Yeah. Are you, Simon and Josh, are you seeing similar trends yourself?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I think you'll get to the point fairly quickly where there'll almost be a non-green economy mark that will identify companies that aren't able to attract those type of credentials, and it will just become the norm that companies, particularly more on the public markets, they'll just be expected to be reaching those standards of how their revenues are being originated and how they are performing and operating as a good corporate citizen. So it's a huge trend, but I think it's got to become absolutely the center of people's business models, rather than being an incremental positive to attract incremental capital.
Yeah, and that could only be good for the economy, I suppose.
Absolutely. And I mean, across scale-ups, we're seeing, really substantial ESG interest. And I think also the businesses themselves are often in the space which ESG is covering. And actually the idea of ESG sort of having a groundswell of support across investment is hugely positive for scale-ups who are often in those sort of new industries and new areas that are really sort of taking advantage of whether it's new regulation or the looking to respond to the challenges of net zero and other things which are out there and being flagged by the government and others. And so I think the ESG interest really does sort of underpin a lot of the ideas that are sort of out there, whether it's down to appropriate corporate governance or indeed just the culture within the business. I think there is really, really strong trends within scale-ups that link to that, and indeed the sort of interest in venture circles around them.
Thanks. Thank you. Obviously, it sounds like there's funding out there, there's money out there. When it comes to funding, it's not just about the cash; it's about people and relationships, and that's still having the right management team, having a funder on the board. That's still pretty much part of the deal and part of like growing your business. Would you say that that's the case? Sometimes people forget about the people side of it, and that should be still at the forefront.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, people are critical, and they're a huge part of investment considerations as well. And when we look at scale-ups in the north, we know that sort of half of scale-ups are actually looking very specifically at developing the skills and the capacity within their top team, and that they have sort of similar structures in place across their sort of governance as you find in sort of the rest of the UK. But within sort of senior level skills, they're actually looking at brand building and other particular skills as well, which can be really critical parts of investment. So whether that's sort of looking at strategic development or indeed looking at the way in which they understand sort of access to markets, I think those types of things are often not part of the same conversations as the funding, but often they are actually just as critical to business success and growth. And when we sort of look at where they're going with this, they're also considering, non-executive directors. Are there easy routes to find those, and are there high quality ones are available for them in sort of ecosystems and networks that they're in? And those are really quite critical questions, I think, for businesses as they sort of consider what they do with the funding as well as where they get it.
And finally, how do you think the North is performing when it comes to finding and funding companies compared to other regions? Are we heading in the right direction, getting there, or is still a lot more work to be done in this area?
Shall I take that? I mean, I think one of the biggest challenges we actually face is just how ambitious some entrepreneurs are. I think one of the criticisms, if you like, or observations we get from funders is that there's a willingness of entrepreneurs to sell out relatively early rather than creating a really, really big business and sort of being long-term greedy and not worrying about being diluted down to own a relatively small percentage of a company worth billions of pounds. So I think that's the biggest challenge the North faces. It's a big generalization, but certainly when you're chatting to investors outside of the UK, that's one of the most interesting observations about the access, to companies for them that they want to invest in and entrepreneurs that they want to support in the north of England.
That's an interesting observation. Ken, have you heard anything similar, or what do you think? How do you think the North's performing?
My perspective, from a public markets perspective for a second, I mean, there were 126 IPOs last year. 20 of those were from the north of the UK. Is that enough? Probably not, but actually it's enough that now there are enough examples, there are enough stories out there of businesses having done it successfully that the peers of the entrepreneurs that have gone that route can share their story, share their experience, good and bad, and generate the next wave that's coming through. And it's also important, just going back to the ecosystem point, to say that it has really been very positive for the advisory community to have that wave of investments that have happened, and helping to attract some re-entrants to the Northern advisory community, like Panmure, who've just set up with Simon. So, but that's something we're really delighted to see, and I think it's really helpful to those companies out there who want the broadest possible view on what their funding options and investment options are.
Thanks, Paul. And Ken, you're about to say something as well.
Yeah, I think I was going to cast my mind back to 2018 when we were putting the Northern Powerhouse Investment Fund together, and I was genuinely concerned. We had a lot of money that we wanted to put into equity funding, and we were using the last of the European money. We only have so long to use it, and I was wondering whether we would find good enough quality deal flow, and I think we have, and not only have we, but we've seen that deal flow improve in quality as we've gone on. So I think we will build on NPIF, and probably actually with our next round of funding, which is a bigger amount anyway, but I think we're gonna put more into equity. We'll probably keep the debt funds going because we've found that they bring some great benefits, but yeah, I think we are at this point, and it was mentioned earlier that distances aren't quite what they were, and we're building. So I think it's great. We perhaps at the moment haven't quite hit those levels of ambition that we need, but we're working towards them, and I'm sure we will get there. I think one of the things we used to talk about back in those days was how the economy of the North was the same size as that of Denmark, And I'm sure people in Denmark don't worry that they're too small or lack ambition, and I think we should be the same.
Right. Thank you, Ken. Oh, that's takes us to the end of this session. Thank you so much for your time and your insights. Certainly some interesting companies across the north, and sounds like there's a lot of funders and money out there. So it's just about getting it to the right person and making sure you're doing the right deal. Right. Well, thank you again, Simon, Ken, Bod, and Josh. Please do stay on for the rest of the day. We do have lots on this afternoon. The War on Talent sessions will be starting soon. We've got Sarah Praz from UA92 talking to us at 2 o'clock on the blue stage, and I'll catch you all later for the innovation sessions. So I'll speak to you soon.